All right, so this is our first unit, our first chapter within our Latin America unit. So we're gonna talk about Mexico today. So Mexico is obviously in North America, right to the south of the United States. However, the culture in Mexico is a lot different than the US. So starting off with landforms, we have the Ring of Fire, which we also have this in the US. And if you don't already know, the Ring of Fire is all around the Pacific Ocean, and it is basically where we see a bunch of tectonic plates kind of colliding together. We get a lot of tectonic activity. And because of that, we end up with earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis in this area. And it really is the entire Pacific Ocean. So the western side of Mexico, of South America, of the US, of Canada, we are all along the Ring of Fire, and then it goes all the way over to Asia and hits like Japan and Indonesia, Australia. It's a really, really big area. So because we are along the Ring of Fire here, there are quite a few volcanoes, and you can see them on this top picture here. These are quite a few of the volcanoes in Mexico. You can also see it's pretty mountainous in some areas in Mexico. And this mountain range is the Sierra Madre, which Madre means mother, and then Sierra means mountain. And the Sierra Madres are actually split into three separate parts. You have the Sierra Madre Occidental, the Sierra Madre Oriental, and the Sierra Madre del Sur. But collectively, we just call them the Sierra Madres. And these are an extension of the Rocky Mountains. And then we also have the Mexican Plateau. So that is this area in here. If you don't know what a plateau is, it is a piece of land that's a little bit raised on all sides, almost like a table in some ways. It just kind of sits up above, and it can be a really, really big area. So within the Mexican plateau, we are going to see the most moderate temperature, so it's not going to get insanely hot or insanely cold. And because of that, and because of their location, we end up seeing most people in Mexico living within the Mexican plateau. And then more specifically, we have the Central Plateau right here in the middle. It's kind of located between two mountain ranges, and this is known as the breadbasket of Mexico. And it's called that because that's where most of the farming of grains takes place, the grains that are going to be used to create bread. So here are just some better pictures that give you a good idea of what Mexico looks like. I think we have all seen the stereotypical movies and ideas of Mexico, but Mexico actually has many different environments, and it can be a lot different than what we have been shown or what we imagine it to be. So once again, this map here is showing us our mountains, our Sierra Madres, and then we have the Mexican Plateau here, and we'll talk about the Yucatan Peninsula over here as well. And then here are just two volcanoes that are located in Mexico, and then a lot of the northern Mexican climate looks like this. This is kind of what we imagine it looking like. And then looking at water, so northern Mexico is that stereotypical Mexico that we think of. It is really dry. Some of it is a desert, not a lot of water there. They do have the Rio Grande, so that's what we call it in the US. Once again, in Spanish, Rio means river, and Grande, or you would say Grande, means big, so it's just a big river. In Mexico, they actually call it the Rio Bravo del Norte, which means the big river up north, which I think is really funny. But the Rio Grande is going to form the border between Texas and Mexico here, and then you can kind of see just some really small, short rivers that feed into the Rio Grande. And then if we go a little bit farther south, we have the Lerma River, which is going to feed into Lake Chapala, which is the largest natural lake in Mexico. And here is a nice little picture of it on the map here. So if we were to zoom in, you could really see Lake Chapala and then the Lerma River here. That's what the river looks like, and this is actually what Lake Chapala looks like. It's a very, very large lake, and it is absolutely beautiful. They do have some like resorts along it. And then if we go to the eastern coast of Mexico, we can find the Gulf of Mexico. I know recently the president signed an executive order to make it be named the Gulf of America. So I guess we can use those interchangeably for now. So Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America. And this is the east coast of Mexico, like I said. There are many different animals or sea creatures that live here that we don't necessarily see elsewhere. It is actually, so it's still part of the ocean, but it's actually really sheltered from ocean currents. So then it's pretty calm there. You don't get a lot of waves. And because of that, we see animals like manatees live there. And that's why Florida has a lot of manatees. They're just kind of an interesting little creature. And then this area is also really well known for shrimp. If we go to the western side of Mexico, we will run into the Gulf of California here. So this little strip of land is called Baja California, and then this is just the Gulf of California. So, once again, lots of different animals live in here because it is protected from the ocean waves as well. And you are going to see whales, manta rays, leatherback sea turtles, great white sharks, and a bunch of other really unique animals there. So there are actually many different climates within Mexico, and with each climate we're going to see a different biome. So we will start in northern Mexico with that kind of stereotypical environment we think of. And they have chaparral, which is all this kind of like scrubby looking stuff here. It's just kind of like little bushes. Yeah, nothing super great, but they are really able to withstand drought. They'll see mild rainy winters and hot dry summers. It's probably not going to snow there even though it is farther to the north. They are going to see cacti, shrubs, and shrub oak. They also have a lot of wind and low growing plants, and that is just how those plants have developed and adapted to that environment. And then they also have thin and rocky soil. So it's a very specific type of plant that can survive in this environment because it has to be able to withstand heat, not a lot of rain in the summer, a lot of wind, and then the soil's not very good either. So if we go to southern Mexico, this is where we are going to see vertical climate zones. So because they have a lot of mountains in this area, as you go up in elevation, that's going to change your climate. So in the lower altitudes, it's really hot, almost like a rainforest, especially on the East Coast. They do have a lot of humidity there and a lot of rain, and it is basically a rainforest there. And you can see from these pictures, like some of it looks really green, some of it's a little bit drier, just kind of depends where you're at. And then for natural resources, they are the world's #1 producer of silver. And within the Mexican plateau, they have an area called the Silver Belt where they get all of the silver from. They also mine zinc, bauxite, which is also known as aluminum ore, lead, gold, mercury, cadmium, antimony, manganese, and copper. They also have a lot of timber, especially in the south. They have fish, and then whatever they produce agriculturally, like cattle and a few crops. They are one of the world's leading producers of petroleum. They are ranked 13th in the world for crude oil exports. 3/4 of their electricity is created by thermal power plants, which are powered by oil and natural gas. And then 1/10 of their electricity is created by nuclear energy and other renewable resources. So then we will talk about the human geography or the cultural geography of Mexico. So once again, lots of unique cultures and people here, and there are various ethnic groups within Mexico. So typically we just call people who are from Mexico Mexican, but within that there are lots of different little ethnic groups. You can say the same for the US. Collectively we are all Americans. However, there are lots of different cultures within that. So in northern Mexico, because of the environment, not a lot of people lived there throughout time. If anyone did, it was just small independent groups of nomadic people. Nomadic means that they moved around. So they hunted, gathered, herded livestock, and did very little farming. And one group of people that still live there now are the Tarahumara, and they are known as the running people. They literally just go out and run for fun. It's just part of their culture. It's just what they do. They consistently run marathons, which is 26 miles, 26.2 miles, I think. And they run more than that just every day or whenever they want. In southern Mexico, because they have a lot more moisture, they're able to produce a lot of crops and do a lot of farming. So throughout time, we've seen a lot of different ethnic groups and civilizations pop up there. So one civilization are the Maya, and they lived on the Yucatan Peninsula, which is way over here. And the Maya were one of the earliest and largest civilizations within Mexico, and they were fairly advanced when we think of ancient civilizations. They had stone cities. They had a lot of different technology of their own that they made. And they just kind of ruled over that area and were able to trade with Native American tribes in the US and then other groups of people farther south. And they ruled over a pretty big territory. Like, this is a lot of land for that time. They did, however, have to abandon most of their cities in the 1100s, and there's no concrete reason why the cities were abandoned. Many historians believe that it was just because of overpopulation or from famine, where they just either kind of split up and went on their own ways, or just a bunch of people died and so they left to go find better people. Also within Mexico, there are two other kind of ancient civilizations. There's the Teotihuacan and the Zapotec, and we will more than likely do a little bit more of a deep dive into all of those civilizations and those groups of people, so we'll learn a little bit more about them later. The descendants of the Maya still live within Mexico, and a lot of people that we would consider native Mexicans can be descendants of the Maya, and they still try to practice the same Mayan traditions. The language has been passed down, and they are still trying to maintain the culture, even though the Maya just kind of split up and went on their own ways in the 1100s. Another group of people that hopefully you remember talking about from a prior social studies class are the Aztec. Their capital was Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. So the Aztec were known for being really, really fierce warriors, and they were able to conquer a lot of different civilizations within their area. And then the Spanish came over from Europe and just kind of took over the area, murdered a lot of the Aztec, and now there are very few Aztec people who live today are descendants of Aztec. Most people today are mestizos, which are a mix of Spanish and indigenous heritage. And the Spanish came over. They were looking for three things: gold, glory, and God. So they came over looking for gold. The Aztec had a lot of it. So they conquered the Aztec for that reason, and that's where you get glory from gaining land, and then God because they were spreading Catholicism throughout Mexico, throughout those indigenous tribes. And to really rub it in the face of the Aztec, the Spanish ended up building Mexico City on top of Tenochtitlan, and they actually dismantled most of the stone pyramids and used the stone to create Spanish-style homes. And then eventually the Spanish conquistadors or conquerors, they set up gold mines and silver mines, and then they set up plantations and forced the Aztec and other native Mexicans to work on plantations basically as slaves. And on these plantations, they would grow cash crops like tobacco, cacao, maize, and then they would export it or send it back to Europe, and they would make a lot of money off of it, which is why it's called a cash crop. So then Mexico, from the 1500s when the Spanish came over up until 1821, Mexico was a colony of Spain. And then in 1821, they were able to kind of free themselves from Spain. In 1917, there was the Mexican Revolution, which created a completely new government and created their current government. And they actually modeled their government off of the United States' government. So they have three branches of their government, which are the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. They have a president who rules for 1 6-year term. In the US, we have 2 4-year terms for a president, and they have to get elected to that second one to be able to serve it. But in Mexico, they can only, once they get elected, they have 6 years and that's it. They can't be re-elected. And there is a political party that is extremely corrupt called the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or the PRI. And they have been kind of in power since 1929. Things have changed a little bit. Not their current president, but the president before was not part of that party. And he kind of set about shifting how the government did things and took away some of that corruption. Their current president is actually their first female president that they've ever had, and her name is Claudia Sheinbaum, and she was elected in 2024. One really interesting thing about her is her last name is very German, and we did a little bit digging last year to figure out why. And apparently her grandparents were Jews and actually escaped the Holocaust by fleeing to Mexico. So it's really interesting how that kind of happened and worked out. And then one really big challenge in Mexico are all the drug cartels, and these cartels are very powerful and they might control specific parts of Mexico. And what has kind of happened over time is you had one big cartel kind of spring up and really rule things and run things, and then there's disagreements within, and part of that cartel will break off and form a new cartel, and that's just happened multiple times. So now there's multiple rival cartels who are not afraid to show violence in the middle of very populated cities. There's a lot of not good stuff that happens because of it, and that is a driving factor into why so many people from Mexico are trying to leave Mexico and come to the US so that they can escape that violence. And the other really big issue in Mexico is that they have one small group of wealthy landowners. Some of them are also cartel members. They are going to control all the land, which means they control most of Mexico's wealth. And if you have money, you have power. So they are able to control an already somewhat corrupt government. And we also have a lot of people leaving the rural areas and moving into cities. 79% of Mexican citizens live in urban areas, and Mexico City is North America's biggest city, and they are considered a mega city, which means that you had the city of Mexico City, and it's grown so much that towns that used to be 10 miles away have now been absorbed into Mexico City. So this is just gonna keep growing, and millions of people are moving in. Mexico City is also called a primate city because that is where a lot of culture, economics, schools, just kind of every really important thing you can find in Mexico City, or it has its start in Mexico City. But on the flip side, so you do have really, really wealthy people living in Mexico City, and you can see that from this top picture. Like, that resembles a city in the US. Very nice, modern, technologically advanced. But what you don't see in that picture are the slums or the poor areas, and there is a lot of overcrowding, poverty, lots of pollution in Mexico City. It really just depends where you're at within that city. And this is pretty normal for most places in the world, most big cities. If you go to LA or New York, you're going to see those same things. Most people are Catholic, that is their religion. Catholic is a type of Christianity, and it's just a little bit more strict. A lot of people in Spain were Catholic, so then when the Spanish came over, they spread Catholicism, and that's why so many people in Mexico are Catholic. They also value their family, and you might see multiple generations living together. If you've seen the movie Coco, you really see it in there, and the whole plot of Coco is being remembered by your family, which shows you how important family is in Mexican culture. The total population of Mexico was 128.5 million in 2023. Their population density is 171 people per square mile. And they have universal health care, meaning that the government pays for their health care. And they actually have hospitals and doctors that are better than the United States. There are a lot of people in the US who will actually go to Mexico to have certain surgeries done because they have better medical care than us in some places. Not every place. The rural areas are still very rough, but in Mexico City and some other bigger cities, the healthcare is pretty good. Their literacy rate is allegedly 99.5%. I am not sure how accurate that is because the US is 79%. So for me, it just seems a little bit out of the norm for Mexico's to be higher than ours, but I guess that's something that we could really dive into. And then their life expectancy is 76 years compared to the US, which is 77.5. So for economics, Mexico has the 13th largest GDP in the world, which is pretty good. Once again, we really have that stereotype of Mexico that the people just live in really rural areas and they're all farmers and that, or they're all part of the cartel, and that's not necessarily true. Mexico does actually have quite a few industries. They have a really big tourism industry, and they have a lot of factories, which places them at 13th in the world. So if you remember, GDP is how much money is being made from the items that are being produced within Mexico. So to be ranked 13th in the world is pretty good. Like, they're sitting really well. But if we look at that in contrast to this next thing, it kind of makes you question what's going on. So their average income is just around $15,000 a year. So that stereotype is true in some circumstances. You do have people who are making pennies a day just trying to make it by, but you also have millionaires and billionaires that live there as well. There's just such a big gap between the rich and the poor that it's insane. And 15,000 a year is not much. Like that's people make that in the US for working a part-time job for like 20 hours a week. So, it's not a lot of money to live off of. And then if we look at the government, the natural resources are supposed to be controlled by the government. However, the government is fairly corrupt, so then the wealthy landowners are going to control the natural resources because the government is being paid off to let them do so. Same with the land. So the government has some say, but really they're just corrupt. And then for transportation, a lot of people use cars. They have a decent highway system. They also have a good railway system. And for the rich, they will travel by plane to go a lot of places. And more than 1 million people legally, not illegally, but legally, cross the US-Mexico border every day. It's a really common thing for people to just go between countries for the day. So if I'm a US citizen, I might bop down to Mexico for the day and vice versa. People will cross over to do shopping or to, just hang out, do whatever, and then they come back that same day. And Mexico is getting better with cell phones. Once again, it's really a rich versus poor thing. The rich are going to have cell phones, but not necessarily the poor. Same with internet. They do have high-speed internet, but it's only available in certain places. And in 2016, so this has been 10 years ago, but in 2016, about 45% of the population did not have any access to the internet. So I'm sure that number has dropped quite a bit in the last 10 years, but still really interesting to think about, just the contrast between the rich and the poor. And then our last couple slides are on the people and the environment. So once again, Mexico has lots of natural resources like petroleum, silver, copper, gold, lead, zinc, natural gas, and timber. We do see a lot of droughts in the semi-arid region, so these areas, arid means dry. So semi-arid means mainly dry, but also have a little bit of moisture. However, those hot, dry seasons are lasting a lot longer, and desertification is now taking place. Desertification is the creation of desert-like conditions and basically the creation of a desert. And people who live in rural areas see a lot more desertification. They put a strain on the resources. They might not have enough water or enough food. And then in the south, you have the destruction of forests. And we call this deforestation. 1/3 of the country is covered in forests, but that number is going to shrink. So as the economy grows and as people grow in population, they need more and more timber to build houses and do other things. And when you need more, you're going to cut down more, and then the forest is going to shrink because of that. And then you also have farmers and ranchers who did not farm their land in a responsible way beforehand, so they've used up all the nutrition in the soil, so they can't really plant a whole lot without using a lot of fertilizer. So it's easier for them to go in and cut down more trees, clear out more land, and then just continue doing what they've been doing. So none of that is really good, and they are going to try to do a little bit of reforestation to prevent that from happening. So 12% of the land is arable or suitable for farming. Mexico, once again, has a lot of mountain ranges, plateaus, dry plains, jungles, and large cities. And because of that, they have a hard time growing enough food. And water is also pretty scarce in the north, or it's polluted in the south. More than 50% of the population lives below the poverty line, and they just struggle to find basic resources like clean water, electricity, and sanitation. And then air pollution can be extremely bad in Mexico City just because of the amount of cars and factories that are there.